First of all, welcome to our food safety conference. I know it's the last day and it's pretty early in the morning. So, to get started this morning, we have Miss Liliana.
Thank you, Katie. Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for your attendance now. We are the Primus Auditing team. Let me introduce this topic, that how to approach and prepare for social responsibility audits. Hello again, my name is Liliana Camacho. I'm the Director for Social Responsibility and Sustainable for Primus Auditing Operations. My colleague, Jordan, that is the Skin Manager for Primus GFS, and the Director of Customer Relations, Julian, are here from you. Please let us know any questions related for us. So what is the agenda in general that we prepare for you? Today we are talking about what is the social responsibility and what is the importance beyond to our legal requirements. Why are social audits becoming more common is the principal question that maybe you have now. Risk assessment overview in general for social audits. Overview for SMETA, what is the principal reason for the buyers or retailers requested or push it for 4-pillar audits. Sustainability requirements from retailers. We are talking a little for the sustainability assessment that we created for Primus Auditing Operations. And then we finish with the Primus GFS Model 9 IPM module. So, get to start with the first topic. So, what is the social responsibility and the importance beyond the legal requirements? We know that around more than 100 years ago, we started with the social practices that was increase the accidents in the companies, but we have unsafe conditions. We are not aware what is the complex of the human rights that we need to respect around the world, depends of the legal requirements. So in this case, it is important to understand what is the international organizations that are participating in this part for social responsibility. At first, the ILO, or International Labor Organization, established the principal human rights respects that all the countries maybe says, okay, I bid to be adherents for the Child Labor Convention, for the freedom of association, the principal international human rights. Then the United Nations Organization established, remember for the COVID situation, this organization established the principal requirements for safety, for some rules for food safety too, okay? And then maybe you listen about the Sustainability Development Goals that in 2015 established an international recommendation. It's not mandatory guidance, okay? It's only recommended for example, water treatment, what is the community engagement, what is the identification for stakeholders maybe, okay? So some companies and buyers take the reference for their sustainable development goals and say, okay, all my supply chains, I need to comply with this guidance, okay? And then the other target or the other important thing is the ISG. I don't know if you listen about the environmental, social, and governance guidance that are from Europe, okay? That the Europe country or continent understand that it's not enough the legal commitment with the companies. We need to be more aware of the business integrity with the finance situation of the companies. Yeah, what is about the environmental requirements and the sustainability goals for the companies. This is the principal reasons that why social compliance audits are more common. Yeah, because we understand that the legal commitment always happens and always we need to comply. But what about more for the international requirements? Who participated in the social audits? I think that maybe you are more familiar with organic audits, with food safety audits, maybe another sustainability codes for the customers, and it's relevant new, the social requirements, and we need to try understand who participated or who are involved in these audits. So it depends of the program. For example, in Esmera, we need to consider the next principal parts, okay? At first, we need to understand if the company has an assessment for the stakeholders. Remember that the stakeholders is the principal part, organization or persons that are impact positive or negative as or my company impact, okay? So what about the community, maybe the unions, for example, governments, I don't know, customers, yeah? You need to identify the stakeholders that maybe you impact and what is the requirements that the buyers has to me. Then the company, what is the business relation that we have? What is the legal compliance? I'm aware, really, what is the legal requirements that it need to comply in environmental, in social, you know? And what is the acknowledgement that we have that according to my employees? Then we have our workers. In the social compliance audits, we included all the type of workers because it's important to understand what is the impact that maybe I have the same benefits for the local employees, for the migrant employees, for the temporal. What is the relation with the agencies that requested, that complain with the legal requirements, okay? So in these audits, we consider the temporalities, the young workers, the permanents, the subcontracted, the migrants, what is the conditions that maybe have, if it is the same or not, okay? And then it is important to understand for these audits, if you provide housing or accommodation, if it is on-site or off-site. For example, when you request some social audits, as an example for Esmera, it is important to consider because the auditor needs to go for the housing to evaluate what is the conditions that are in accordance with the legal requirements and depends of the code of conduct that the customer require. What is the conditions? And if it is possible, we need to take some pictures for the general conditions. In case that you have a privacy notice or policy that is not allowed to take a pictures, we can take a pictures and only put the reference, okay? So not to be afraid for this type of audits. I understand that it's not common and maybe says, what is the reason because you need to go to accommodation, or maybe what is the reason that you need to review the contracts or payrolls or pay slips to review this information because I'm complying with the local law, yeah? So it's more than that. The international organizations, ILO are the United Nations, follows the international requirements as it's the ideal step that everybody wants to be, but maybe it's not possible. So in this case, for example, for in Esmera audits that are only an improvement audit, it is not mandatory that you have it now, you know? Depends of the risk, maybe we consider like only a comment or comment in the report and maybe not a rise of funding for that. Depends of the situation. So why are social audits becoming more common? Because the retailer says, okay, all the companies comply with the legal requirements, yeah? But we need to more hard. It's not enough. Why is the reason that the accidents increase around the world? What is the reason that the human traffic increase around the world? Child labor, working hours in excess. It's not applicable for all countries, real. But this is the reason that the companies need to comply more and more with the social audits. Create or engage relationship with the customer and employees, for sure. If the employees receive a good treatment, a good environmental job, you reduce your rotation and absence, you know. Maintain the positive reputation for the companies, demonstrate commitment to the environment and society. It is important because maybe the buyer says, okay, I know that you are in good standing, but how do you can demonstrate it? your commitment with the social compliance. You receive an audit, you conduct an internal audit. What is your base code that you take as a reference? Provide trust and transparency. At the beginning of the presentation, we mentioned about the ESG, the requirements that are international for Europe that included transparency and business ethics. So it is important to know why or who the companies provide a clear requirements for the suppliers, for example, yeah? On what is the transparency that you have in their company as a business conduct, corruption, anti-bribery policies, okay, during your supply chain. And the most common question for the retailers is how to be monitoring human rights violations worldwide. If we know that complying with the legal requirements, where it's another option to identify any violations. It's important, and I know that maybe you don't have enough knowledge about the social audits. How can I start? How can to identify my principal risk, okay, and how to mitigate the impact in my stakeholders? It is important to get an assessment for social responsibility. This is only an example because we know that the principal objective for the companies is to be profitable, yeah? And then we need to be careful about the legal responsibility or compliance, ethical responsibility in the supply chains, be transparency always, and then the discretionary dispensable responsibility, sorry. So in this, in the bottom, you can see that is the ideal stage for the companies. What is the reason that maybe you have the features of the social audits? You need to identify the assessment. It's very important to say, okay, this is my scope. Farms, facility, I have a subcontracted workers, I'm a private company. What is the scope that my buyers request to be audited for social compliance audit or SMETA, okay? Needs to be clear. When you have identified the scope, you have the first step. And then what is the stakeholder engagement? If you identify that maybe, I don't know, for example, you have emissions or you have problems in your local area for water treatment, you need to be aware of what is the stakeholders, maybe organizations or the community are involved. We need to work together to maybe establish some measures, yeah, to mitigate the impact for the water treatment, for example. So you need to identify the stakeholders for that and the principal risk. Then you have the transparency and accountability. When you identify the stakeholders and the principal scope, you need to have a business policy, yeah, to be clear with the requirements for the suppliers and says, okay, this is not only the price. I consider the integrity for the companies, that you are allowed for the local law, that you are commitment with the wages, the conditions for employees, and all topics. Then the compliance with regulations, similar for food safety or for another certification process that you identify what is the matrix of the legal requirements that need to be aware. Maybe I know that for environment it's more complicated because we are not too familiar how to identify what is the requirements that we need to comply. It is important that you are aware for that. The impact assessment is the point that you can identify if the measures that you implemented with your stakeholders or internally are effective. You need to conduct like an internal audits. A good point is conduct to a survey for the employees in case that you want to identify what is the measures according to the good treatment or the grievance mechanism or what is the schedule for the workers and everything. And then when you have all these steps, the last point is the ethical business conduct. Yeah, you establish and you say, okay, I know my impacts, I know my mitigate measures, so now I can establish the business ethics conduct. Because in the practice, we start at first with the business conduct and then get the assessment. And for social, it's important to start in the other ways, okay? And the last part is a continuous improvement. Now for Esmera version 7, it's more complex to understand the management system for the company. So it's not only to evaluate the compliance with the ethics code and legal requirements, we need to identify how the companies are prepared for the next goals or targets that are involved in their impact assessment. And this is the principal changes. This is SMETA 7. I don't know if you are familiar with the content, but for example, in this case, we have two types, different scopes, 2 pillars and 4 pillars. And what is the principal changes? The environmental, and business ethics was reinforce all the requirements that are not only to push, for example, renewable energy. No, it is not the principal requirement. It is to identify how the company identifies what is the usage for water, for energy, gas, what is the water, for example, for wells, I don't know. And if the company have the records or tracker this information for uses, and if the company has what is the waste for water and how many, what is the quantity, the 4-pillar audits records and push to improvement dance. And according to these records, you need to establish targets or goals. This is the principal difference now for the 4 pillars audit. And the business ethics, the minimum requirements for this part is that you have your business conduct, policy or guidance in the company, and you need to identify what is the key roles that are more risk involved to the ethics. Customers maybe, the buyer's department, what is the parts or departments that are more in risks to business ethics violations. You need to conduct a business ethics training specific for these key roles, and then you need to provide a procedure and how to do in case that you identify this situation. Maybe in your company, you don't have this high risk, but the minimum is to have the procedure and you are prepared in case that happens, okay? So not be afraid. In this case, I try to provide you what is the objective for the type of results that I have for SMETA audit. So if you can see here for 4-pillar audit, it's all the stages that are included, and for 2 pillars is only included the environmental as a reduced part, only the legal requirements, and it is not include the business ethics. Okay, this is a general procedure or preliminary steps to conduct this meta audit. I know that maybe we are familiar with food safety and says, I need the audit request for the next week or in this month because the buyer requests me now. So it is important that you be clear in the scope of audit, because in some cases, only as an example, Walmart maybe says, I need an SMETA audit now or for this month, yeah? So I say, why, when as a CB we receive the request, we don't understand clearly if it is only for the farm or packing house or included both. What else the specific scope? So you need to confirm with your buyer or requester auditor what is this exactly scope, because happens that maybe we conduct an audit now and 3 months later says it's not valid for my buyer. I need to add the packing house. So we need to conduct another new audit, okay? So it is important because you need to be a member of SEDEX and need to be paid for each facility. So it is important that you consider this in the scope. Then you become to be a member of SEDEX. So it depends if the facility, physical facility, are in the same perimeter or belong for the same business license. We can conduct only in one facility stages. If you have different facilities with different coordinates, we need to register one facility per one site per facility. Then, I don't know if you are familiar with the SAC, is the self-assessment. When you have already confirmed the scope, you need to complete the self-assessment by each site on the SEDEX platform. The SAC is only include a general information related or internal policies, practices. You don't need to submit any document as a mandatory. You're only completed yes, no, minimum information. And it is important for us as a CB because according to the information that you provide in the SAC, we can identify if the company provide accommodation or what is the complexity of the context of the company, if uses agencies or something like that, or union maybe. Then you request the application, is the scheduling process audit, and it is important to understand that SMETA is not a certification process, okay? Because the buyer only says you need to receive an SMETA audit or social compliance audit. In this case, SMETA is more friendly, I can say, because it's not you fail or pass. Your score is 19 or 100% or 50%. No, not happens. The only evidence for this audit is your preliminary report for the non-compliance and then the final report that are published in the SEDEX platform, okay? So in this case, it is not mandatory that you submit corrective actions previously to receive the final report. You conduct the audit, receive the resume of findings. In a couple of days, you receive the final report in the platform. You need to publish, and that's it. And the corrective actions, maybe you conducting, you provide the corrective action plan and submit. And don't worry in case that, for example, in the platform you see the time scale reference for 30 days, 60 days, anything, it's only as a reference. Don't worry if you need more time. You can take your time and submit the corrective actions, and Primus Auditing are available to review it. The most important part here is that the buyer are aware of that, yeah, that you spend more time to submit these corrective actions. And then the frequency of the audits depends on the risk that the buyer established. We don't have any specific frequency that annual or every 3 years, depends on the buyer requirements. It's very common that now, as we have a new version and the new requirements for an announced or semi-announced audits, we need to do these SMETA audits annually, okay? What is the process of reporting findings in the new SMETA? We have a reference of the ethical code. Do you remember that ethics code is an international ethics that included the principal requirements that mentioned at the first table for the SMETA content? So in this case, we have 3 different types of results. The non-compliance, that is according to the local law or requirements for ethics code. Then we have a good examples, the good practices that you implemented in your company. And then there is the new one, the collaborative action required. I don't know if you remember in the past, in the version 6.1, we have an observations. The observations was like maybe in the future you can have a funding, yeah? And you don't make it any corrective actions. So now SEDEX changes as a collaborative actions that you only have this funding and you need to work with your buyer to establish an agreement, what is the corrective actions that you need to implement it. So it is not mandatory to submit corrective actions. It is not mandatory that the CB review these actions by desktop in the platform. It's only necessary that in the next audit, the auditor evaluate what is the improvement in these plans, okay? And this is important because if you say the SMETA content, we have 12 sections, okay? So this type of collaborative action required, it's only applied in the next section. The responsible recruitment in child labor section, in living wage are paid. This is the most common or frequently now to raise some fundings as a collaborative action, and the non-discrimination practices section. What is the reason that I include these slides? Because now it's very common around the audits that we conduct in US, in Mexico, in Chile, in Ecuador, in Colombia, that the living wage is the objective for the ILO, for the United Nations, for the Ethic Code. It's everybody wants to earn the living wage, no? But it's complicated. It's not easy if I am a company that it's temporary season, that maybe I don't have the workers comes again for the next season, or maybe my buyer doesn't increase the prices for me, and I need to submit the minimum wage to a living wage that it's around 25% more than the minimum wage. So it's complicated. For this reason, SMETA says, okay, you need to work with your buyers to establish, okay, this is the requirement by the ILO organizations, but if you identify that it is not possible to pay the living wage, only establish a corrective action plan. No worries. Maybe you have opened this funding 2, 5, 3, 10 years. We don't know. Okay, and only appear like in a collaborative action required. So this is very common in the SEDEX e-learning. You have available some resources about what is the calculations or what is the process that are approval for SEDEX to calculate the living wage. Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry. Yes, please. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for your question. It's very important to understand that this living wage calculated, it is important that the auditor understand the risk and the context of the company. We have a guidance that maybe says, okay, the company doesn't pay the living wage, but provide bonus, provide this additional payment for extra payment for working hours or etc. And I say, okay, according to the guidance, it is not pay the living wage, but the company push on that, okay? And we can consider that is a complaint. But in case that is in agree, please. So in case that, for example, you say, I don't have a plan, or maybe depends of my context, I have this a mitigate situation, it's aware for the evaluation, yeah? We need to understand what is the context of the company. You know, so if the company mitigate this with another bonus scheme or something, it's allowed to the code, and it is okay. Yeah. Yeah, because it's an international requirement.
I'm sorry for
Yeah,
interrupting.
yeah.
You have to do the analysis, and there's different tools for it, which I'll go over later.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also living wage where they work and where they live, not necessarily where they work. So if you're sourcing out of a certain region of Mexico, you can pull the living wage from Mexico,
Mm-hmm.
and you do the comparison to show that you paying $16 an hour is
Mm-hmm.
more than sufficient. But you have to have actually documented that you track back your supply chain.
Yeah, thank you,
It's not
Katy.
necessarily, $16 an hour in Florida, we're not paying that. We're paying $7.25 minimum wage. But
Mhm.
that's where if you have domestic workers, you may have more of the issue. But you just have to do and document the calculations and the risk assessment to show that you did the analysis to have a rationale to defend it.
Yeah, this is, sorry, Kathy, thank you. This is the most important, that you are aware and you calculate it at the minimum, okay? Thank you, go ahead. I can hear clear.
She's asking if it's for everybody in the company or just specific workers.
Oh, yeah.
Question of
Okay, so the question is specific for the workers, for the operational workers. It is not necessary for administrators or supervisors or something. It's specific for the production workers. Okay. Any other question in the room? I know that it's a creepy topic. Yeah, the most important is that you are aware, that you have the calculated, that you are aware of this information, okay? The other side is that you have a plan of improvement, that maybe you have, okay, I identify, but it's not a plan for the company, for finance situation, for etc. Okay? Sorry? 15 minutes. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, I need to run. So, well, this is important part for the SMETA new version for the management system assessment. So, if the observations was removed for the last version, now we identify the gaps or the opportunities for the company in this assessment, okay? So the auditors need to evaluate the compliance with the legal requirements and the international requirements, but at the same time, we need to provide in the report a general overview of the company. If says, okay, the company have the knowledge, have the skills, the responsibles are clear for all the people that manage, I don't know, human resources, health and safety, the business ethics, or something like that, and provide the comments here. And maybe says, okay, the responsibilities are clear or are documented, but the responsible doesn't show the knowledge, or have a lot of findings in this section because the responsible are not aware for the requirements or the responsibilities. Or maybe consider, okay, the company has a good management system for policies and have all documents and procedures, but doesn't follow, because identify these gaps for that. This is only a comments box area, okay, that is not affected your scoring or that impact in the funding section. It is important that it's only like an improvement area that you identify where are your gaps. This is the example of the resume that you receive the preliminary results in the closing meeting for the audit. The auditor explained all the findings, that what are needed, the corrective actions, and then provide this resume. So please don't be afraid, because not affected for the results. It's only like a mirror to say, okay, I need improvements. I need some fundamental improvements in my procedures, or maybe you need to wait for the final report to identify what is the reason that you are not addressed, that are fundamental or improvement needed, okay? So SEDEX says that maybe any company add a robust system, because says you never identify any improvement in the company. So if it is possible that you identify, or you can say more frequent, that is not addressed or some improvements are needed, because always we need to improve on something. The scheduling and sampling is relevant, not change, is the same, depending of the total of workers. Please consider when you file out the SAC and the application request for the audit, only to consider the employees that are from production, not consider administrators or something, because maybe can increase the sampling. It's not the same for 50 than more than 100, yeah? So in this case, for 4 pillar audits, only which need to be considered and a half day more for evaluate the business ethics and environmental section. The interviews, it depends of the audit and the production. Maybe you say, I'm not aware that you conduct the group of interviews because I'm affected for the production, so we can go ahead with individual only, or we prepare in different ways the interviews. Remember that is only confidential information just to confirm the implementation of the policies, okay? Not be afraid that the auditor asks about what is the treatment here, you are tired bad or something. No, it's only in general, how many hours did you work, where you come from, what is the training that you receive for safety, what do you do in case I have an accident, did the company provide accommodations, just to confirm some implementation policies, okay? And this is too important, the request of audit. I know that the buyers request the audit, whatever the buyer requires, but it is important that minimum comply with the 50% of the production of the season, yeah? In case that you know that, okay, Walmart, but I'm in a low season, I don't have more works. Normally I have 100, and now I have 20 workers only. And the Walmart is pushed for the audit. Don't worry, you can request it and we can conduct it, but it is important to include it in the audit report, okay? Good. So the last slide, this is the resources that you have available in the SEDEX platform that is more helpful for you about the manual, the supplier manual. It's a resume of all of the requirements that you have. The Annex 3 and Annex 4 is the most important because the Annex 4 is like a checklist for the audit. It's the requirements that you need to comply. And the Annex 3 is an example of the management system assessment table that you need to cross information that you provide the resume to be grading for robust, fundamental, not addressed, you know. So this is the principal resources that you have. For this case, that's all for me. So I don't know if you have any questions. I know that social compliance audits, maybe you have more concerns or questions. Please let us know. If not covered in this presentation, you can send in the feedback, or maybe you can send the answers to you. So please let me know if you have any questions now. No concerns? Okay, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Liliana. All right. How many people in here have actually done one of these audits? I was just wondering. And how many people need to do one of these audits? It's about half and half. All right. So I realized halfway in that I never actually introduced myself. So I am Katie Odrobina. I'm with Georgia Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association, and I do a lot of their consulting services and help people actually tackle food safety, regulatory, now there's social compliance stuff. So for the purposes of today, we've picked SMETA just as the audit to go through because there's been a lot of interest in it in the Southeast. However, now let's see. Like she said, the pointer's not working. However, there's a lot of different audit schemes out there that are internationally recognized. Some of them are more geared towards produce and different things here. So you can pick different ones. The topics are going to basically be the same. Each of these things have chosen different labor codes and whatnot to try to adhere to, but it all pretty much boils down to the same topics and goals. So what is SMETA specifically? It's going to be the SEDEX Members Ethical Trade Audit. And again, we've said before that it's going to go through companies' labor, their health, safety, environmental impact, and business ethics. This particular audit scheme has chosen to be based around the Ethical Trade Initiative base code. And so if you go, you have to join SEDEX to do this one, of course. But the whole point of this particular audit is to help you identify and control the risks in your chain and protect your workers from unsafe conditions, overwork, discrimination, low pay, forced labor, and then it wants to know the framework. So again, it's a continuous improvement assessment, so you're not going to get your certificate, but there's certain things in here that agriculture specifically is having a very difficult time like the living wage calculations and stuff. So there's certain things in here, though, they want you to be compliant with, work towards it. Anybody who's done a food safety audit, when we first started doing this, it has to be a team approach. Like, do not try to approach this topic and hand it over to HR and say, do this. It's gonna take outside resources, it's gonna take a framework, and it's gonna take a lot of effort. You can't just play at it. If you're really gonna do these, you have to commit the resources to getting it done. So this is actually from Department of Labor, that they're one of the resources that we have later on. They have some stuff to help you implement this. So what is the ETI base code? It is based around 9 principles for your workers. Employment is chosen freely, freedom of association and collective bargaining, working conditions are safe and hygienic, child labor is not going to be used, living wages are paid, working hours are not excessive, no discrimination is practiced, we have regular employment is provided, and no harsh or inhumane treatment. Okay, these 9 core tenets, everyone in here, you're probably 80 to 90% of the way there because we follow the law and we all have best practices. It's going to be the specific implementation and documentation that you're going to have a couple of issues with. Within these 9 tenets, we have some subtenets that you have to meet. Employment is freely chosen, so there's going to be no forced, bonded, or involuntary prison labor. Workers cannot be required to lodge deposits or leave their identity papers with their employer, and they're going to be free to leave employment. Number 2, freedom of association and the right to collective bargaining. You do not have to allow your workers to unionize. Okay, so the first 3, it's pretty much non-applicable for agriculture. However, 2.4, they have the right, where the right is restricted under law, employer is going to facilitate the development of parallel means. That's giving them a committee, that's giving them a complaint box, that's giving them some kind of HR mechanism to report. So you don't have to get too worried about how, we're trying to protect workers' rights, but we do not have to worry about unionizing. Working conditions are safe and hygienic. At this point, this is all the physical stuff for the most part. Safe and hygienic work environment provided, bearing in mind the knowledge of your industry, specific hazards of your operations, steps to prevent injury and accidents arising out of the risks, reasonable, as far as reasonably able to minimize what we're finding here. Workers shall receive regular and recorded health and safety training, access to clean toilets, potable water, and as appropriate sanitary conditions for food storage. Accommodation where provided is clean, safe, and will meet their basic needs. And the company observing the code shall assign responsibility to a senior management representative. So we'll get more into each of these later into the presentation. But child labor shall not be used. We need no recruitment of child labor. Companies shall develop, participate, and contribute to policies and programs which provide the transition of any child found to be performing child labor so that they can attend quality education. Children and young persons under 18 shall not be employed at night or in hazardous conditions. And the policies and practices shall conform to the international ILO standards. Living wages are to be paid. This is a big one for everybody here. Wages and benefits paid for a standard working week at a minimum meet industry and legal standards, whichever's higher. In any event, wages should always be enough to meet basic needs and provide some discretionary income. All workers shall be provided with written and understandable information about their employment conditions with respect to wages before they enter employment and then as they're being paid. Deductions from wages as a disciplinary measure are not permitted and shall not be under national law unless they're required under national law without the express permission of the worker, and disciplinary measures should be recorded. I'm literally just reading you these slides. We'll get into more detailed stuff in a minute, but I mean, for those of you who have never seen this, it's the easiest way to see what the requirements are. The working hours are not going to be excessive. They need to comply with national law and fall under these other subcomponents here. Working hours, excluding the overtime, should not exceed 48 hours per week. That's a big one for agriculture, and that's where they're asking you to work towards getting away from it. All overtime is supposed to be voluntary. The total hours worked in a 7-day period should not exceed 60 hours unless it meets these 4 requirements where it's allowed by law, allowed by collective agreement, appropriate safeguards are taken to protect the workers' health and safety, and the employer can demonstrate exceptional circumstances such as unexpected production peaks, accidents, or emergencies. Unfortunately, seasonality of crops is not typically considered to fit this definition. Workers shall be provided with at least 1 day off in 7 or 2 days off in a 14-day period, and international standards recommend that it be a 40-hour work week. Question? No. All right, number 7, no discrimination is practiced. No discrimination in hiring, compensation, access to training, promotion, termination, retirement based on race, caste, national origin, religion, age, disability, gender, marital status, sexual orientation, union membership, or political affiliation. That's already legal law, so copy and paste this statement straight into your policies. Regular employment is going to be provided. To every extent possible, work should be done on the basis of recognized employment. Organizations under labor and social security laws from regular employment should not be avoided through the use of labor-only contracting, subcontracting, home working arrangements, or apprenticeship schemes that have no intention of actually giving them real employment. And number 9, no harsh or inhumane treatment is allowed. Physical abuse, discipline, threat of physical abuse, sexual or other harassment, and verbal abuse shall be prohibited. So, lots of reading you stuff. What do we actually need to do the system? There's a couple of core documents that everybody's going to have to develop. First of which is going to be your human rights policy statement. This is basically your mission statement. Within it, it needs to contain a couple things, and then there's other things that you could add to it. First thing, your explicit commitment to respect all internationally recognized labor standards. Specifically, the ILO Declaration on Fundamental Principles of Rights to Work, and you're going to reference the ETI base code if you're doing the SEDEX audit. You want to impart your company's expectations for your own workers, your business partners, and other people in your supply chain. And then you need to include information on how you intend to implement this commitment. You could also add in stuff here with the steps you've taken to develop the policy, any description of how you want to deal with conflicts, a summary of which rights you think are the most at risk in your supply chain that you've identified, and then information also on how you want to account for actions if you do find issues. So that sounds pretty complicated, right? Well, actually, before we get there, this is the ILO Declaration on Fundamental Principles and Rights. It's the same thing as ETI breaks it down to 9. These are the 5 core ones: freedom of association and effective recognition of the right to bargaining, elimination of all forms of forced or compulsory labor, effective abolition of child labor, elimination of discrimination in respect to employment and occupation, and a safe and healthy working environment. So you can see all these internationally recognized ones come back to the same topics. They just break it out a little differently in how they want to see it. But anybody who knows me knows that we like cheat sheets for people. Oh, we didn't have that one. So when we get to the code of conduct, once you got your mission statement, we have to go to the code of conduct, and it's going to set out all your standards and policies. Basically, you reference your labor standard, and then you're going to use this document as the core foundation for how you're going to implement it throughout your company. You got to identify your stakeholders. Sometimes we have a worker code of conduct and a supplier one, and other times we have them all together. But when you're designing this, the workers should be your key stakeholder. It's all about workers' rights and protections. So when you're making your policies and whatnot, you have to keep in mind how you're going to be protecting their rights. This is supposed to be a public document that you're supposed to communicate to your workers and to your supply chain. You can do this with training. You can post it on your website. You can have newsletters, but you do have to communicate it out. So what goes into the code of conduct? These are your minimum topics. Okay, this is pulled from the ETI code. Yeah, everybody's got the cameras out. Basically, you need a header for each of these, and you need to have specific policies addressing these. Human trafficking and forced labor, child labor, recruitment fees and expenses, health and safety with well-being, contracts for employment, do you even have them, retention of personal documents, bonds, deposits, and forced savings, humane treatment of workers, your workplace equality statements, definition of your wages and benefits, definition of your working hours, freedom of movement and personal freedom, grievance processes, employment agents and labor recruiting, whether you're using them or not, worker training and awareness, freedom of association, and housing. So this document basically has the overall structure for what you're going to do, and then from there you can develop your own extra SOPs and whatnot. But this is going to be the core to what your overall program becomes. You must have a modern slavery statement. which modern slavery is the recruitment, movement, harboring, or receiving of a person through the use of force, coercion, abuse of vulnerability, deception, or other means for the purpose of exploitation. With this statement, you're going to do a risk assessment of your supply chain. You need to assess the negative impacts resulting from if you're working with a company that has, if you worked with or bought from somebody who has an issue with modern slavery. It's not so much even going to be you necessarily, but who you're sourcing from. So what goes into this statement is going to be organization about information on your organization and your supply chain, the policies relating to modern slavery that you've implemented, parts of the business and your supply chains that you found have the highest risks, due diligence, proof of due diligence that you've checked it and how you're going to prevent it, and then the training for your staff and or supply chain and stakeholders. So does that sound easy to do? Guess what? In California, it's legally required that companies over a certain size have one of these statements publicly posted. So here is Del Monte's. As you can see, I don't know if it's a little blurry, but they have an exact statement saying we absolutely, if I can read it, that they have no tolerance for it. And then you see you have subheadings here of supplier assessments and we have certifications, assessments, internal accountability and training, supplier audits. We have a commitment statement. We have this diversity contacts to show upper management who to report to if you have issues. Del Monte has chosen to put in their purchase orders as the terms and conditions. There are statements that say if you do not comply with our code of conduct, that we will stop doing business with you, and there's actually consequences laid out in it. So this is one example that we don't need to recreate the wheel. Here is another one. In the UK in 2015, they did the Modern Slavery Act. So you can actually pull modern slavery declarations from multiple companies. This is for Univeg UK, and you can see it covers the same type of stuff, except they have chosen to do it in letter format, and they have referenced a lot more active campaigns, government campaigns, and as their training. They have their risk assessments, they have educating, they have their supply chain management. So it's the same kind of approaches that you're going to use to prevent this. Health and safety plan. This is where you're going to get into the working conditions of principle number 3, that we have a healthy and hygienic environment for your workers. Has to be met. It's going to lay out the steps that you're going to take to prevent accidents and injury. Depending on your processes, you're going to have different steps that you might need to take specifically for the working environment. Workers need to receive regular recorded training, health and safety, access to the clean toilets, potable water, food storage facilities, accommodation. If you're doing housing, you need to be clean and meet basic needs, and then you must have the responsibility. So in order to do this health and safety plan, there's certain things that you're going to have to include. First off, first aid. And there's a lot of stuff in here because a lot of it's the physical inspection of your facility. So they want it on paper as being required, but when they do the physical walkthrough, they're going to look for a lot of this stuff. So you need to have formal accident and injury investigations. You need to have first aid boxes. You need to have somebody on your staff for each shift trained in first aid and CPR. Access to medical facilities in case of emergency, documented electrical inspections, regular health and safety training. Okay. Anybody got questions yet? So for the formal accident and injury investigations, let me make sure we're on time here. You are actually legally required to have a log 300 and log 300A filled out and posted in your facility for OSHA every year. Certain companies in certain industries and over certain sizes have to actually file this with OSHA every year, but for the most part, we just have to have them posted. Little known fact, you have to report to OSHA within 8 hours if you have a death. And if you have an amputation, loss of eye, or hospitalization of a worker, you have to report it within 24 hours. So I've had people not know this little fact, and then when something happens, OSHA swoops in and you can be facing 6-figure fines if you don't follow this. So just a little FYI. Also going into your emergency or health and safety plan, and this could also be a separate plan as an emergency response plan, or it can be part of the program. You're going to need emergency preparedness, procedures for emergency evacuation, training your workers on evacuation procedures, having evacuation maps posted throughout the facility, doing regular drills for different issues that might arise, such as fire, such as tornado, if you happen to be in the Midwest, emergency alarms that can be heard throughout the site, regular testing of your alarms, properly designed, maintained, and marked emergency exits. And I know some of us have pole sheds, and people laugh their heads off when we have to take the pest control map and draw 4 arrows to say, here's your exit. But it's an expectation that you have done that. Emergency exits cannot be blocked, and you need, if it applies to you, you need valid fire inspection certificates. Firefighting equipment, you have to have the legal minimum of equipment, whether that be alarms, extinguishers, etc. And again, everybody's facility is slightly different with what the requirements are. You need to maintain your fire equipment. That's going to be the inspection cards that are required to be on all the fire extinguishers. And they need to be verified annually by an outside contractor. You need to have a trained crew. There should be operating instructions on your actual equipment. Machinery, written procedure on how to use each tool. We need maintenance and preventive maintenance programs. You need safety guards on your equipment. You need formal training for any high-risk equipment. Produce, forklifts is really a big one. You must have forklift certification. That can either be your outside company coming in and certifying your forklift drivers, or you can have someone in-house take the train the trainer course and then train your workers with a formal written exam and a driving test. But it's actually mandatory that a lot of people don't realize. You need machine guards to prevent access to dangerous machinery parts, and measures to prevent hair, clothing, and accessories from getting caught. Hazardous materials, depending on what you have in your site, some of us have things like chlorine dioxide, peracetic acid, you may have pest control chemicals. Whatever's stored on site, you're supposed to have safety data sheets for everything. You're supposed to have procedures for safe storage, use and disposal of materials, secure storage if it's hazardous. If you have refrigeration, you have like ammonia, you have to have that under lock and key. First aid facilities in the immediate location, procedures to deal with accidents and spillages, training that your workers actually understand all this stuff, and then regular risk assessments. I will say, we all have SDS sheets. However, I've had auditors read the SDS sheet and go, you're not following it. It says have the ability to wash your eyes for 15 minutes, and you've got a little bottle of saline solution next to your peracetic acid. You have to actually follow the documents and the guidance that's actually in there. So make sure when you're doing this, you read through this kind of information. Wages and hours. This is one of the biggest headaches that most of us have issues meeting. Working hours not exceeding 48 hours per week. How many in here have, during height of season, have their workers working less than 48 hours in a week? It's a pretty big deal here. And then they do not want the total hours worked in a 7-day period to exceed 60 hours, provide 1 day off in 7, and you're probably going to have to provide proof of the working hours. So you're probably going to have to show them some type of time card. Look, this is very difficult to do, and depending on who you're selling to, how much they force compliance. I mean, it's a continuous improvement, but I have had some companies literally refuse to take, if you cannot meet this standard, they will refuse. Like in the clothing industry, we had some where it's typical, the work contract says 60 hours in a week, and we've had manufacturing companies say, nope, it has to be capped at 48. And the workers won't take the contract without it. So the company ended up having to pay the 12-hour difference to the workers and let them sit at home and not work for those 12 hours. But the buyer who they were selling to would not accept them as a vendor without them doing that. So this can get very out of control over time. We're not there yet with produce, but the direction it's going, we have to be careful. Wages, you have to prove during the audit that all wages are paid appropriately. You're going to have to show pay stubs and time cards. The pay stub is supposed to show the particulars of the breakdown. So if you have any deductions for taxes, loan repayment, the worker borrowed money, child support, you have to have it on there. Overtime, if you're paying it, is supposed to be compensated at or above 125%. Domestic workers can never make less than a contract worker during the same job function where that worker is on contract. So I've got places that have that are doing repack year-round, domestics. You're paying them $7, $8 an hour. In comes your packing crew for your seasonal crop. They're making $16 an hour on H2A. What are you going to do? You're legally not in compliance. And your H2As tend to get wage and hour audits, so they're getting paid appropriately. And then an auditor comes in and finds out you're actually breaking the law, that you're not paying your domestics enough money as well. So you got to be very careful here, because everybody's relying on your contract crew to make sure that their migrant workers are getting paid appropriately. But it's also your domestic workers they're going to consider. If you're paying people on piece rate, you're going to have to show adequate documentation. This is where the headache comes in. Who here uses piece rate? Anybody? Okay, I had an auditor come up. I'm going to show you two documents. I don't know if you can see these. This is what they handed the auditor for a harvest crew to break down their piece rate pay. They gave them this, and then they gave them this as their timesheet. Anybody see any issues? These workers were getting paid piece rate, so they were getting paid $120 per bus. So they would harvest. It would be, we had a crew in the field, we had a crew in the shed. So in the morning, we had 12 workers working. They worked all day. They got paid $93. Then we have these other two groups that did some of the buses. Do you see any documentation when they came in beyond this saying they entered on bus number 8 and this other one was on, they did 6 buses and they got paid a certain number of rates? And then we have these tiny calculations across the top that don't have an algorithm or any kind of defined formula. The inspector looked at this and went, this isn't proof of anything. And this is a crew that had been audited by Department of Labor, wage and hour, in 4 different states by 4 different people over the last 4 months. And it was sufficient for them. It was insufficient for the auditor. Then we get to the time cards, and we have things like ranges. And the rate column is empty. And then we have this stuff in red, which ended up being adverse wage was being calculated. So they made corrections without documenting what these numbers were for. So this was, the workers were being paid appropriately. There was never a question of that. But what ended up happening was, because the documentation looked like this and wasn't formalized and there was no SOP and it wasn't communicated to the workers how it was being calculated, the inspector downscored this company on every single wage and hour question. And it got published, and they got a call from the people they were selling it to, the reason they were doing it, as to, you're not paying your workers? So they had to redo all, and the thing is, this was an outside company, contracted labor crew for the company. And so they wound up having to redo the entire audit because it looked like they weren't paying their workers and they were overworking them. You have to make sure that you guys have policies and procedures that are very clearly laid out so that an outside party coming in understands it. And piece rate especially can be very difficult to get that achieved. Living wage, I know this isn't, we have to achieve living wage. So the question earlier as to how are we going to do it, there are different calculators out there. This one is from MIT. Again, we're trying to make sure that you have enough income for the minimum standard plus some discretionary spending. This particular calculator, you go in, and this, I pulled it up for TIFF, Georgia, but you go in, you select your country, your state, and then your county, and it has a variety of calculations here for how much it would cost for minimum wage, poverty wage, and living wage. So this came out with one adult in Tiff County, Georgia, just supporting themselves, $19.10 an hour. That comes out to about $39,000 a year. Are you paying your packing crew $39,000 a year? No. So mind you, when you're doing this with your workers, they're coming out of Mexico and different areas. You can go in and pick the exact areas to compare, and it will be obviously much different than domestic here. But if you're paying, you have domestic workers and migrants, this kind of thing can get out of hand pretty, and again, it's got it with 2 adults. You got to do surveys of your workers essentially too, to know who's married, who's not married, that type of thing. But to try to achieve living wage can be difficult. I have later some other methodologies you guys can choose, but there's different calculations out there. So you decide you have to do this process. Walmart sends you that letter that they sent out yesterday saying, by the way, did you guys get that letter? I got 3 phone calls yesterday. Walmart had sent out a letter stating that you are committed to this process, and if we are buying from you, you have to do it. And they're like, what does that mean? It's like, you have to start doing these audits. So once you start the process, first thing you do, you have to join SEDEX. It's about $200. Everyone got their photos? So you join SEDEX. And then, as Liliana said, you have to go on and do the self-assessment questionnaire. It's going to go through the supply chain topics, policies, your systems, your business practices. And then it's industry specific. So, if you type in that you're a forestry person, there's different risks included that they might ask you about versus if you were agriculture. But it will go through your management system, your labor rights, the health and safety, the environment, business ethics. There is now on this with the 4-pillar, there's also an environmental specific SAQ. I didn't go through it today just due to time constraints, but it can help you with the new stuff if you're going to go from a 2-pillar to a 4-pillar. The actual audit process, which Liliana already went over, so I won't bother to repeat it. The on-site audit, have a roster of your workers, guys. That's the first thing they ask for, but you do your opening meeting. They select a certain number of workers they're going to want to interview. You do your site tour looking for the physical, and then the management and worker interviews take place, the document review, pre-closing meeting, where you will get the write-up of what was wrong, and then the closing meeting and summary of findings. Again, Liliana already went over this. This is continuous improvement. It's not a pass-fail audit. So we're going to just identify weaknesses, strengths and weaknesses in your system. And they do identify your strengths. They make comments in this report. It's not like they're going to write you up as looking for everything negative. They will write up that you have a holiday party or whatever you tell them is extra incentives. But again, you're not going to get a final certificate. And this is the part that you guys might actually like for those of you who are already doing it, the outside resources. I have no idea how I'm doing on time. Okay. First off, you got SEDEX. SEDEX itself has got tons of e-learning resources in here. They have the SAQ, they have the analysis systems, they have a risk assessment, and it'll let you do trend reports and whatnot. So you can, there's a lot of, and then in addition to what Liliana mentioned too, the actual guidance documents are in here. You can do a lot of trend reporting and you can connect to your supply chain. The whole point with mapping out your supply chain and then trying to figure out if the people that you're buying from are conducting themselves appropriately. We have supply chain management tools where you can link in and search the system. And then they also have training courses, both seminars, webinars, in-person stuff for different specific topics, and then also just on the whole overall audit process and explaining SMETA to people. Ethical Trading Initiative itself has got a lot of resources on their website. If you sign on here, you can see you can download the base code, which has all the guidance, and then it has these posters that I had up there. You can print those off, and you're supposed to post them. You can use that to communicate to your workers. But if you go into the guidance and resources for each of them, you'll see it comes up with links to resources on their website, then outside resources specifically, and some other types of, I don't know if you guys can even see these that well. It also posts white papers, definitions, links to, like this particular one has links to other things on the ILO database, but you can click through and find a lot of content. You don't have to recreate the wheel on a lot of this stuff, but there's examples of what other people did as well. This is for Right to Know for your workers through Department of Labor. There's a First Step Poster Advisor you can go through where you select your industry and then it tells, and the number of workers you have, and it'll give you a printout of what Right to Know posters you need for labor compliance, and it has links for you to print them out in various languages if you don't want to actually purchase the posters from anybody. This living wage, I said MIT is on here, but there are other ones up here and methodologies and resources for helping you calculate it for your region and where you're sourcing your workers from. This is through Department of Labor, the Bureau of International Labor Affairs. They have several different tools that you can work through. This is the Better Trade tool. So if you are importing stuff or if you're sourcing labor internationally, this is looking at labor exploitation. So you search by country, by region, by commodity, and it can give you information on where there are issues in the chain. And so you can choose not to use a certain region, or you can just have more information overall to justify your program as part of your risk assessment. They also have the Info Hub on here, and that has a lot of information about workers' rights protections, reporting things if you find something wrong, what the standards should be for workers. You can use it for training purposes a lot. Comply chain, this is the one you guys are going to really like if you don't have any kind of system. Comply chain is something that it's an actual tool they put together. I see cameras, I'll wait. So it's a series of documents, and it walks you through how to actually build or assess your own current program to see if there's anything that you might be missing. So it includes legal, moral, public relations, risks, point stuff out, and so if you work your way through it, it's 8 steps that are going to give you guidance on what you need to include in your program, how to conduct risk assessments, how to prevent violations. If you do find violations, it gives you resources such as where to report them to or what to do about them. Grievance mechanisms for your workers. You are supposed to have some of those, so it gives you some ideas on that. It was developed by U.S. Department of Labor and the Bureau of International Labor Affairs. They're perfectly fine with you taking content. Just make sure that you reference it came from this tool. OSHA, also in Department of Labor, but OSHA itself has a huge resource library. They have apps, they have checklists, e-tools, the e-matrix. There's expert advisors where you can, they take general questions, and then there's video tools. If you go into this, like they have a heat stress app that you can put on your phone for heat stress for your workers. There's stuff on forklift training, safety trainings, pesticide workers type deal. They have risk assessments for job injury and whatnot to see if you have to identify. Remember we said you have to identify the hazards for your specific operations. There's a lot of tools on here that are already done for you, and training and posters and things of that nature that you can just pull from to see what industry standard actually is. This right here, you guys are gonna love this one too. I said you have to do a health and safety program. So this is a pilot tool from OSHA if you sign in, and what it is a series of 8 workbooks, and each workbook, if you print it, has multiple pages, and it walks you through a health and safety program. You have to fill in your own industry risks, but it gives you examples. So here, you have to have management, so it's telling you to make you have to have your committee, you have to say what the 8 goals of your committee are, but if you actually open this up, it's 8 workbooks, and there's probably 8 to 10 pages per workbook that you can print off. And, well, I say 8 to 10 pages. It was 8 to 10 individual PDF files with multiple pages. But it ends up being about a 50-page booklet that you can print off and go through, and that way you have covered yourself for a lot. Also available from OSHA, these are some different health and safety resources they have. Yes, sir? Literally, this is straight off the OSHA website. Just take a picture. But yeah, it's the Health and Safety Program Step-by-Step Guide. Everybody got it? And then also on this website in the same vicinity, you can find some of these. It's different. So they have links to the different programs by state. They have self-evaluation forms on here. There's implementation checklists to make sure that you guys didn't forget a step to anything. There's an audit tool that gives you like a pre-audit, kind of an inspection, the way an inspector would approach it, like if OSHA were to come out to your facility to do a walkthrough, what they're looking for. And then they also have the job analysis worksheets here and a template to show you if you have to see if certain jobs that your workers are doing do require more PPE or something of that nature. And this is the last one I got, but this blue campaign is from Department of Homeland Security on human trafficking. And you know, when you go you're on the interstate and everything, and they've got all those nice posters saying human trafficking and whatnot, that came out of the blue campaign. But if you remember that modern slavery statement, the second one I showed you, they were referencing all the campaigns that they were participating in for training resources. So this one is really nice in that they have some nice informatics that you can print in multiple languages. And they have training videos, and these are tailored. Some of them are for basic workers, and then some of them are good for like management level, and if you wanted to educate some of your actual suppliers, like your contract crews, if you wanted to make sure that you were auditing them to give them a resource, this is something easy that you can point them to. So, have I overwhelmed everybody? A lot of content. If you guys need copies of this, email me. I can send you all the resource links. But there's a lot of stuff out there that you can use. We don't need to recreate the wheel, but it is a lot to try to implement overall, especially if you haven't done it yet. We did say, though, the 4-pillar, all the environmental stuff, we didn't get to that today. So if you guys need assistance with that as well, there are other resources for that we can go over. Nobody has, yes. Yes, Clay. Yes. Yes, if you're, yeah, they interview, when they select how many workers to interview and they take them over and are interviewing them, and the same workers that they choose to interview, they typically pull their pay. They're the ones that you're going to follow those workers through the whole process. They pull their pay stubs, they pull all of the time cards, pay stubs, they interview them, question them. So if you've done a huge training with all this stuff, great, take a picture. I've got people with the training binder, and it's right there in the break room. It's like, well, it's right there, sir. You know, and you got posters if you can prove you communicated it. So a lot of this stuff you have to post. If you put it for how are you going to prove with your suppliers? A lot of these documents you can easily just put on your website and then put in your email at the bottom of your email, like, oh, reference our social compliance audits, you know, as your disclaimer that you can prove that you did it. With the fire drill stuff, yeah, we need the date, we need how many workers, we need a roster, we need a photo of that it took place for best practice. And it's like, okay, we can do that. I mean, you live and learn as you go through this, but yeah, those worker interviews definitely, you got to make sure the workers, when you identify your stakeholders, you got to make sure the workers are on board with this. That's why I said you can't just hand this to HR and say, go do this. It's got to be implemented across the company, and the workers have to be aware of why you're doing it and what we're doing with it, so that they work with you on it. Anything else? All right. We next have Jordan. You're going to... Yeah. So we also have here our IPM. And Miss Jordan is going to go over that for us.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jordan E. Remo. I'm the schemes manager at Primus Auditing Ops. I'm going to go to a little bit more lighthearted topic, sustainability. I know it's still a question out there for a lot of people, but a little bit easier. So I'm going to go over a couple of our sustainability services. Most popular right now, I would say, is the Primus GFS Module 9 IPM practices, which is pretty new. The Sustainable Food Group put out the Sustainability Standard, Be Better certification. POW, we have a sustainability assessment, which is great for, a starting point for if you don't have any sustainability program documented yet. I'll say most people are doing sustainability, they're just not documenting it. So, learning to document that information. And then we'll go over a little bit. We offer all of these trainings through our training center. Oh, one thing I had to add, Liliana forgot to mention, we have a SMETA training coming up on January 22nd. If anyone's interested, it will go over social responsibility and then go into detail on SMETA. What was that? Sorry. Okay, perfect. So we're just going to briefly go over the Primus GFS Module 9 IPM practices. I will let you know if you supplied to Walmart. Walmart does accept this add-on, as well as Golden Eagle, Whole Foods. Oh, Cisco, yes. Cisco also requires the sustainability standard. So what's IPM? Most of us know IPM stands for Integrated Pest Management. It's a science-based approach to managing key pests through a combination of biological, cultural, physical, and chemical methods to reduce pest damage while minimizing risks to human health, beneficial, and non-target organisms in the environment. So certification, Module 9 is optional. When you go to schedule an audit, you would request the Module 9 be added to your audit. When you achieve certification, there's actually an icon that will be on your certificate that shows that you achieved Module 9. Applicants must request it ahead of time. There is the option to add it on later if you do forget. It can be done within that year time frame. You would just have to contact your CB and let them know, hey, I need to add the Module 9 to tie to my farm audit. These are the checklist questions. Sorry. It's very short. It's a starting point. However, this can be variable information in the IPM sustainability world. I know that Katie was talking about like documenting thresholds is really hard in today's industry. So there is supplemental information that's coming out soon in regards to how you guys can achieve documenting thresholds. Scientific research, documenting like weather-related events to, tied to your thresholds that you use. There's a few additional references that Azul's putting out to support this and help you guys with this, but our QA team can help walk you guys through that if you have any questions. Corrective actions, you can submit corrective actions with this, and you actually have to meet compliance, just like the Primus GFS scheme. You will have to get a total compliance or an exceeds compliance to pass this module. This module does not affect your food safety audit, it's completely separate, which is great. And then we have the right to determine based on your report and the findings if we need to make another on-site review to verify your corrective actions, which I'll say is not very common, but this EB does have the right to do that. The corrective action process is the same as Primus GFS, so you have the 30 days to submit the corrective action from the date of the audit. So the next steps, you review the practice documents on the website, then you will contact POW to schedule this with hopefully your food safety audit, so it's just a one and done thing. And then you just show your compliance with IPM to Walmart or whoever's requesting it. Do any of you guys have questions? Very simple. Here's our contact information if you guys need to reach us. The QA department, like I said, can help you with any specific questions. All the ones, go back to this page to show you guys, all of the Primus GFS Module 9 Sustainability Standard and Be Better all comply with Walmart's requirements to meet sustainability. I know that's a big thing this year because 2025 is their deadline to start implementing sustainability. So if you guys have questions on those schemes, feel free to reach out to us. Great, thank you. Yeah, simple.
All right, we've got extra time. Does anybody have extra questions on anything relating to this stuff? No? All right, well, yes. Oh, Miss Liliana wants to add. Come on up.
Only one thing that is relevant new for SEDEX that I forgot to mention is that maybe in the next quarterly included the night shifts audits. So in case that your companies declare the night shifts, we can conduct this audit at this shift for the audit, okay? It's important that you need to be aware. And the same for the 4 pillars and for the ethics section that we need to include it, you need to complete it, the SAC information that in case that you don't complete it, the SAC at previous to request the audit, maybe it's a non-compliance for the audit. It's not a stop to continue with the scheduling, but maybe it's a raise of funding during the audit if you didn't complete, okay? And that's it. Thank you so much.
We want to thank everyone for dragging themselves down here this morning. If you guys need questions, we're all still around. The resources are here. Trade show's open. Lunch starts at noon. And hit up the auction. So thank you all for coming.